We're going to do it together. We have to unify, put our petty differences aside, who's more powerful, who has the information, and let's work together in lockstep. You, the people, your stories are fascinating, they're real, they're organic, and they're the truth.
Right Now with Ann Vandersteel. Good evening and welcome to Right Now with Ann Vandersteel. 60 minutes with me, all signal and zero noise. Tonight, I had the wonderful opportunity to stand before New Hope Church over the weekend and speak to an incredible group of patriots that were there to see Derek Evans, myself, and Marjorie Taylor Greene. We're going to play some excerpts from that for you because it was quite a speech. And I think people are finally getting the message. Dr. Heidi Klessig, a retired anesthesiologist, is going to be joining us later on, talking about how death is determined in the United States. Brace for impact, folks. You're going to want to be all hands on deck listening. All this brought to you by the Satellite Phone Store. Get on over to sat123.com. As the internet gets more crazy, communications are getting more unstable. Get your satellite phone backup communications plan. And food, lightsoutbeef.com. I keep hearing more reports about millions of chickens and cows being slaughtered. Lightsoutbeef.com, never before injected with the mRNA. Get your lightsoutbeef.com. It is shelf stable for 20 years. And vandersteelhealth.com. Head over to vandersteelhealth.com. This is my solution to staying fit, trim, and ready to rock and roll, also with shelf stable food. You can save $120 with your promo code. We'll be right back.
My Towels solved a problem that we've all had with towels. You go into the stores and they feel lotiony and soft, but then you get them home and they wind dry you. That's why I made My Towels. They actually work, they're soft, and they absorb. And now I'm excited to announce 2 brand new lines of My Towels. What makes them the best towels ever is they're now made with 100% long staple Shapir cotton. This is a combed ring spun cotton that makes My Towels even softer and more absorbent than ever. And now you get a 6-piece set for an amazing introductory sale price as low as $29.98. So go to mypillow.com or call the number on your screen. Use your promo code to get My Towels for only $29.98. Or you can get my designer premium line for just $20 more. Either way, you save 50% now on all My Towels. They actually work. What a concept. This offer won't last long, so please order now.
MyPillow.com. The world we once knew is collapsing. We're being warned to expect rolling blackouts, and our political leaders are deliberately shutting down pipelines, fuel refineries, nuclear power plants, and energy exploration. The currency is collapsing, while financial assets are plummeting in value, and the global food supply is being deliberately decimated. To survive this war being waged on humanity, you need more than just regular prepping. You need resilient prepping. And that's the title of my new free audiobook, Resilient Prepping. You can download the entire audiobook and a printable PDF transcript for free right now at resilientprepping.com. Resilient Prepping teaches practical strategies for prepping in 3 layers: high-tech, low-tech, and no-tech. Resilient Prepping is your ultimate guide to surviving the total collapse of the world as we know it, because that's exactly what globalists are trying to achieve. Download this entire audiobook for free right now at resilientprepping.com.
Many of you have been asking, where am I getting the energy from? Where is the glow coming from? What's changed with your hair and skin? Well, simply in the last month, I started taking a product, C60 Evo. If you go to c60evo.com/Ann Vandersteel, you too can get radiant energy, mental focus with C60 Evo's ESS 60. What is it? That is pure C60. Get that increased flexibility, immunity, and longevity. And guess what, folks? It's not only for people too. You can get some for your pets. My animals are on it now. And that's right, I'm having trouble keeping up with Vegas, my dog, who I like to go on long walks with in the morning. He is battling back on the heat down here with his C60 Evo as well. Go to c60evo.com/Ann Vandersteel and try their delicious oils that you can eat and add into salads or put on your food, and also incredible facial serums and creams that are making a massive difference. and the texture and feel of my skin. c60evo.com/Ann Vandersteel. And good evening. I'm Ann Vandersteel. Thanks for joining me this evening. You know, I'm headed back down to the Darien Gap next week with Michael Yon. There is still a lot happening at the border. Lots of great people are out reporting on it. Yet, Biden's first executive order was actually passed without significant challenges from Congress, which is strange because part of it read, and I quote, "The Secretary of State and the Secretary of Homeland Security shall promptly evaluate and implement measures to enhance access for individuals from the Northern Triangle to visa programs as appropriate and consistent with applicable law." Well, folks, the Northern Triangle is a region in Central America known for its poverty, violence, and corruption. Movies and TV shows have often used and shown us gang violence and corruption as they're famous for this. This is actually the criminal element that Joe Biden has invited to this country. Now, I've traveled pretty much all over the world, and I'm not the least bit xenophobic, although, you know, they love to call you that. But when you open the door to just push anyone in without any type of vetting or disease testing, you have violated your oath to keep Americans safe. So once again, I asked, Grand Old Party, Republicans, the GOP, hello, is there any lights on? Anybody home? Why are you allowing this crisis to happen? Well, I talked about that and a lot more this past Saturday at the New Hope Church in Vero Beach, Florida. Marjorie Taylor Greene was the headliner, and I opened for her at this event. It was a packed house. I want to thank the Conservative Watch USA, Annie Delgado and her team for putting on one heck of an event. Derek Evans, who's also a J6 political prisoner. He's also running for U.S. Congress. I interviewed him last month on this show. He's running up in West Virginia. Also spoke equally explosive. This is a little excerpt from what went down over the weekend.
All right, well, I guess we got the fake news here. You might as well get the real news. Because, that's what I've been doing for the past 7 or 8 years. Since 2015, when President Trump came down the escalator, I used to work for Mr. Trump back in the early 90s at Trump Plaza. And I said, man, if that guy would never run for president, I would help him. I told my father about it. He said, well, a businessman, there's a novel idea. Since we're running a company right now called America, we might as well get a businessman in there. So anyhow, 2015, he came down the escalator, and well, here I am. Jumped on Twitter. I thought that was for Beyonce, and the rest is history. But I want to give a shout out, Derek. You rock. You rock. And by the way, I endorse you, and I interviewed you, and I thought you were fabulous then, and you're fabulous right now. This is what we need in Congress. We need people like Derek Evans, so do whatever you can to support this. And I also want to give a big shout out to the folks that are here from our military. I have a son who is serving right now. I have a stepson who just got out. My father was a captain in the U.S. Army Air Corps as a test pilot in Eglin Field. So my sincere appreciation to all members, current and veterans right here in the audience. Thank you for coming. Because without you standing on the shoulders of men that are great from 250 years ago, along with all of us, we wouldn't be able to be here right now still talking, despite the fact that CNN will selectively edit this speech I'm giving if they even, put me out there, because they don't want me out there, because I'm a Pizzagate conspiracy theorist according to these nutbags. Which is the Jeffrey Epstein and all of that sort of coming true now. Haven't we just learned a few things recently? All right. Special shout out, by the way, to U.S. Navy Petty Officer Albert Norton. Where are you? There you are. Thank you much, sir, for your service. God bless you. God bless you. And a very special shout out to our J6 political prisoners, Derek Evans, who's here, but we've got 192 currently incarcerated behind bars that are serving and standing on the Constitution because they wouldn't kowtow, take the knee, and take a deal. They said, no, we're going to stand on common law, on the Constitution. We're going to fight the administrative corruption. As they say, it's stuff made up. It's legal fiction. It's not lawful. There's a difference. What's legal is not lawful. What's lawful is not legal. And the U.S. Constitution is what reigns supreme. As Derek said, God gave us our rights. We exchanged those rights for privileges to be a U.S. citizen. And with what I've been reporting on for the past 6 months down at the border, including a month down at the Texas border, and 3 trips, including the one I'm doing down into Panama, Central America, Belize, Guatemala, and other countries, I can tell you right now, your U.S. citizenship is trash compared to what these invaders are getting. They're getting minimally $2,200 a month, which is more than most Social Security and veteran pay, to come across the border illegally and live for free in the United States of America. So tell me how this privilege of being a U.S. citizen at this point is working out for you, because before 1868, little known fact, we were all Americans. We didn't have the crown of thorns known as U.S. citizenship on top of our heads. We were a happy union of states working collaboratively together to trade and support and defend our republic. Until, of course, the 14th Amendment, which is what they weaponized against President Trump under the guise of an insurrection, which, as you know and I know, happened on November 3rd, 2020, when a coup d'etat was organized by the intelligence community and, of course, our public servants, which they're not public servants, they're political hacks, right? And none of them are legitimately really in office at this point. I'm going to get to that. But in 1868, they turned us into U.S. citizens by passing unlawfully and ratifying the 14th Amendment. 41% of the states in 1868, after almost 100 years of lawfully electing public servants and sending people to go and represent the people lawfully, they exchanged it for U.S. citizenship. And then we were turned into citizen voters. And we started voting in our debt slave masters, and that is what we have become, a debt slave society with an illegitimate Federal Reserve, a private corporation of an international banking cabal consortium that is part of the U.S. Department of Treasury, Inc. So when you write that check to the IRS every year, that money doesn't go to supporting veterans or homeless or our roads. It gets shipped into the World Bank. That's right, the IMF, which we now know is part of this whole USAID corruption that has gone on in Ukraine. Why else has the military-industrial complex turned around and supported so many members of Congress which have dual citizenships with Israel? The only country many members of Congress are allowed to have a dual citizenship with is Israel. And I'm not meaning the biblical Hebrews. I'm talking about the people in Israel that are as corrupt as our own U.S. government cabal. This is a weaponization of government against people worldwide. The people have been oppressed everywhere. It's not just this country, it's everywhere. And our own intelligence community, in conjunction with military-industrial complexes, in conjunction with big pharmaceutical, big media, all these big complexes in terms of public-private partnerships are weaponized against all of us. Everybody in the world has become enslaved in this debt slave society. So when you talk about becoming a U.S. citizen and the rights you now exchange for the privileges of, ask yourself, how good are the privileges for you compared to the people that are invading our country by the millions? That's right. I've seen it with my own eyes down in the Darien Gap. I've been in the jungles down there with Michael Yan, my esteemed war correspondent colleague, who has logged as a Green Beret more years behind enemy lines reporting on wars around the world, and to the complicit and duplicitness of our own U.S. government in facilitating all of this. Let's talk about all the wars we've been engaged in, all the weapons we've left behind, and you compare that to what we know to be the Iran-Contra or Benghazi or Fast and Furious, for instance, where weapons trafficking was under the guise of an operation, which was nothing more than code word for, we're going to give this to the bad guys so we can create bad guys, to have wars so we can subdue the people into fear that they need a bigger government to protect them. I give you the Patriot Act after 9/11. Let's take a look at some of these things, like 9/11, flying planes into buildings. Oklahoma City, when you had a bombing there. Interestingly enough, the day before 9/11, I'm sure many of you are astute to this, Donald Rumsfeld, the Secretary of Defense, announced that $2.3 trillion in 2001 went missing from the Defense Department. Do you know the Defense Department, the DoD, still can't rectify their balance sheet? They don't have a solid budget. They can't find money. It's a regular thing for them. They've never once been able to provide a solid accounting of any of the money for the Defense Department since 2001. They flew planes into buildings, and I have a very high-level source who contacted me the other day and said, Ann, you need to get this out, because this is the playbook. The playbook is as follows. You look at Oklahoma, you look at 9/11, and you realize the reason planes flew into buildings and bombs have gone off in certain places is because they're destroying evidence. Remember Hillary Clinton's little fire at her Chappaqua house? Okay, they're destroying evidence, but what do they yet have to destroy? What is on the hook right now? The Epstein client list is a very big shiny object right now, and everybody is salivating at the mouth to find out who's Jane Doe or John Doe 107. They need to know this. But it's really more of a media firestorm because we've seen all these names for years. We know Bill Clinton went to the island. We know Hillary Clinton went to the island. We know Harvey Weinstein and Oprah. And yet people still consume the media from these people because we're sheep. We don't actually stop and think what it means. What are they doing to us? Well, here's a theory I want to posit to you about the significance of the Epstein client list. While it's disgusting, and I know we're going to find out horrible things that they've done to children, and I don't want to get into that because we're in a church and it's just diabolical and satanic, they still have COVID evidence out there. They need to destroy COVID evidence. We know about the crimes against humanity. We know Pfizer covered up just how bad that poison death shot was. I posit to you, just like 9/11, we know that the buildings were actually destroyed. Yes, could planes have flown in the building? Absolutely. But is that how the buildings came down? No. We all know this. It's been proven already that those buildings were brought down. You can see the thermite explosions in slow motion photography. This isn't even a secret anymore. But think about this. Think about hospitals, and I have a high-level source asking me to look at this and get this out there, that in hospitals around the country where they've actually studied and discovered who was behind the COVID SARS-CoV-2 spike protein, a very gene-specific spike protein that targets certain DNA, certain racial specificities, right, of different people out there, and certain people are immune to it. Ask yourself, who made this? Well, what if you were to have, I don't know, perhaps an intelligence operation inside some of the hospitals where that evidence might remain? And what if there was, like the World Economic Forum has been warning us, a cyber attack? And what if that cyber attack started attacking hospitals and destroying the evidence at these hospitals who know who's behind the SARS-CoV-2 spike protein that has killed millions of people around the world, that is also the same spike-generating DNA protein that's in these COVID bioweapon injections? Can you imagine if all of a sudden hospitals started having cyber attacks and evidence was destroyed and we could never determine who was behind it and prove in a court of law? Or better yet, prove in an actual people's court with people, county grand juries standing on the law of the land, the Constitution, as it is supposed to be. So you see, in 1868, when they made us U.S. citizens, they also started to create this administrative chaos, this administrative law. 10 square miles of Washington, D.C. is a legislative democracy. It was incorporated in 1871. It's a corporation. When Nancy Pelosi says, you and me are a threat to her democracy, guess what, folks? She's right. We're not a violent threat, but we're a threat to their governing body. Why? Because we are a constitutional republic. They work for us, but they have flipped it around, and when she says she's sovereign, she's not lying either. They're their own sovereign, they have sovereign immunity there in Washington, D.C. They are foreign to us, and we are foreign to them. So the reason they've been able to get away with what they've been able to get away with is because they've changed the law, and we've allowed them to stand on it. We need to stand up taller than they because they work for us. The Constitution is the highest law of the land. There's a reason our Creator's name is invoked 4 times in our Founding Fathers' papers. We need to embrace that, and we need to remind everybody God gives us our rights, not the government. So at this point, I'm really asking you to ask yourselves, what can I do? How can I be effective in restoring the Republic? And I'm going to give you some solutions, because you know what? We've all heard the problems. We've heard how bad COVID is. We know about the election theft. We've seen the election integrity data. We know that they've stolen this all. I'm not going to go into that anymore because you've had that shoved down your throats and you're sick of hearing it. What you want is a solution. There's an organization I've become very acquainted with. It's based on the Constitution, biblical principles, and it's called tacticalcivics.com. Tactical Civics is going to teach you, and they've stood up over 1,300 county chapters in our 3,143 counties we have total throughout America. They've stood up over 1,300 chapters. And in these chapters, they're meeting regularly twice a week with their members to teach them about the Constitution. It's simple, folks. It's really very, very right versus wrong sort of principles here, written in plain English, nothing crazy. But in these chapters, you're going to learn about county grand juries. You're going to learn how the people can stand and demand a grand jury and form it on their own. They don't need a blessing from a magistrate or a judge or a prosecutor. They can do it themselves, and they can evaluate and investigate whomever they want. And even for the grand juries that have been appointed or selected by prosecutors, whether county or federal, they can turn around and investigate the prosecutor, because the people are the government, and they don't answer to the prosecutor. They answer to themselves and to God. So it's about time we get off of our butts, get out from behind the keyboard warriors, and we start to act as we're supposed to, which is the government of this land, because the government of this land has absolutely abandoned the people. They focused on themselves only, and they have collaborated in public-private partnerships with corporations that have stakeholders that are akin only to themselves. They only care about themselves. You see Fauci's on the board of this company and so on. This is not about you, it's about them. And we have got to take it back, because again, we are the government. So in tactical civics, you will learn how to stand up a county grand jury. You will learn how to investigate. You will learn that you can take information of the investigated evidence already before us in election fraud, in COVID fraud. And you can take that and you can indict the public official, who isn't a public official at all, by the way. They're a corporate employee of your corporate municipality, of your corporate county, of your corporate state, and of your federal government. How many of you, by the way, are aware of the Declaration of Military Accountability that over 230 members of the military signed the other day? Are you aware that the military is standing up? Haven't you guys been asking, where is our military? Why aren't they standing on their oath? Have you been asking this? Well, you should be. Because again, they work for us. They swore an oath to the Constitution, which is to defend and protect we the people. And so I'm seeing this now, and it's all over the internet. So if you haven't seen it, please go to the internet and look for the Declaration of Military Accountability, because it's out there, and it's a beautiful document signed by 230 members, current and past members of the military, that are saying they will investigate and hold the military, members of their own military, including Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin and General Milley and everybody else, accountable for the COVID crimes of forcing experimental gene therapy that they knew was dangerous. The DOD, by the way, is behind the development of the COVID shots. They slapped a label on it with Pfizer, with Moderna, with Johnson & Johnson, AstraZeneca. The DOD is behind the development of this horrific killing machine. And they have injured and killed millions and millions of people around the world with this. By the way, you ask yourself, why is it we can't seem to get any freedom of speech? And why does it seem like our constitutional rights are constantly in jeopardy? Here's a news flash I bet you didn't know. But again, don't listen to me. Go to your congressional record on December 9th, 2020. December 9th, 2020. Did you get that, CNN? December 9th, 2020. Congressional record. They declared a Marburg pandemic. Did you guys hear about that? Marburg is a hemorrhagic fever. You bleed out of your eyes, your nose. Okay, it's a horrific virus. They declared a Marburg pandemic, but have you heard about Marburg really in the country? No, you haven't. But they needed another pandemic. Why? Because it suspends the Constitution. So what was left of the Constitution is now completely suspended. So therefore, they can move ahead with what they did. And they're continuing this pandemic, they're continuing the suspension of the Constitution, which is why for everybody that has gone to the border and has been screaming about Article 4, Section 4 of the Constitution, why isn't the military, why isn't our U.S. government actually at the border? It's because there's no Constitution. Why is the Customs and Border Protection out there cutting holes in the fence, as I've witnessed? Why is the Texas National Guard, some of them are with and some of them are against the Customs and Border Protection? Why is this melee? Why is it that Governor DeSantis, Governor Abbott are busing or flying these illegal invaders to other parts of the country? It isn't just about political grandstanding saying, oh, look at me, I showed those Democrat mayors, Mayor Adams and Chicago and wherever else they've sent them. It isn't just about scoring political points, it's about facilitating the agenda of the World Economic Forum, which is a globalist organization that is the unofficial State Department for the United Nations. And the UN, Agenda 2030, they have their one world government, and they're moving forward at rapid pace. And the United States government is facilitating it by printing money vis-a-vis the Federal Reserve. And you all are paying the interest on that money that's being hyperinflated out of existence right now as your price of eggs and gas and milk and everything skyrocket. We're actually funding it all, and we're paying the interest. It's sick. We're at $34 trillion in debt, and there's no slowing down anytime soon from where I'm sitting. I don't care what they say out there. The mainstream media will tell you, oh, we're going to lower rates and the Fed's going to lower rates. Guess what, guys? It doesn't matter. That horse is out of the barn. They have printed so much right now. Now, I will say some good news, because as I said, tactical civics is getting people together to teach you actually how to rein it in and be the government and actually investigate and indict. And once you have that indictment, you present it to the local sheriff. Here's where the beautiful thing is. How many of you have ever heard the word militia? Does the government, the U.S. government, do they consider that a good or a bad thing? And why is that? Because we have guns. Because we still have the Second Amendment. But here's the thing. Every single state constitution, every single state has a recognition and an amendment for the people's militia. That is a lawful thing. It is mentioned in our U.S. Constitution. It is clearly denoted in our U.S. Constitution. In fact, it is part of the legislator's duty at the U.S. level is to make sure it's well regulated. This is a real thing. It's not a dirty word, despite the fact the FB lie and their complicit intelligence community-owned media, fourth branch of government, will psyop and MK Ultra everybody to use the word militia and then put a picture of a guy with face paint and camo and big guns running through the woods, shooting at God knows what. This is, Annie, do you need me to stop? Oh, okay, they were waving at me. So this is in fact a good thing. But we need to take our words back. We need to start using these words. We need to say the militia is there as the enforcement arm for the grand jury, so that when the presentment is made to the sheriff, if the sheriff gets a little weak in the knees because he's worried about his corporate paycheck, the people will stand with the sheriff, and the militia will facilitate the arrests. Because we, the people, are going to stand back up those Article 3 courts that the government has suspended under the suspension of the Constitution. And that's where they're going to get the jury of their peers. And guess what, folks? We're going to arrest some people, and maybe some of them in your peer group aren't going to find them guilty, and that's the way it goes. And that's okay, because that's how the Constitution works. But I guarantee you, the amount of evidence out there, what do you think is going to happen to these felonious this district of criminals from Washington, D.C., the district of corruption?
Then I'm going to announce
We're talking about arresting them, and this isn't a pipe dream anymore. They know it's coming. Why do you think Zuckerberg and billionaires are building bunkers? Are we going to show up with pitchforks and burning brooms? No, but that's because they've been criminal and violent towards us, specifically when it comes to war against humanity, starting wars around the world, but also with these shots and pushing the narrative that they were safe and effective. They lied, and it was criminal, and it was crimes against humanity, and they're all complicit. And because they're so evil and are willing to kill all of us, they just assume we would do it back. Since when have we done it? To point January 6th. Don't you think, with the millions of people in D.C., and yes, I was there, and yes, I was one of the very first people to be put on the domestic 102 terror list known as Quiet Skies, and I was unnecessarily harassed for 2 years by the Department of Homeland Insecurity, by their TSA, total criminals, total thugs, disgusting, removing me from planes, making a scene, and making all the passengers uncomfortable, because everybody had to be treated like a criminal, although I got the extra special humiliation constantly in front of everybody. I actually embraced it. I told them I was a man one time, and they had to get a man to pat me down. That was special. And then they were like, no, you're not. I go, well, you might say you can be a man whenever you want, so can I. Bring it on. I filmed it too, it was great. But again, getting back to the point, without getting off topic too much, this is our moment. This is our time. We are at that point of inflection that in 250 years from now, I want to see the history books from heaven looking down at the people reading them then, saying, today you all are the refounding fathers of America, the greatest country ever. Not just in this hemisphere, I'm talking around the world. And we have the power within us because God gave it, and our founding fathers put pen to paper and told us and gave us the roadmap.
Nobody can take it.
No, exactly, Annie. Nobody can take it from us. Not one person can take it from us. I brought, by the way, my son with me today, Christopher. Thank you so much for being here. He's a young pilot, by the way. Hopefully going to get his twin engine licensing here at the local school. But, we are at that point in history. We don't have a choice but to keep moving forward. When they say you're in hell, what do? You keep going. Well, we're going to march right through hell. We're going to put on our boots. We're going to put on our armor of God. And we will not let them take us down. Because gosh darn it, there's far more of us than there are of them, but we just don't know that we have the power. I'm telling you, we have the power.
Yes.
I want to just leave you with a couple of more things because I don't want to get too far over time here, but we actually have some other good things happening. Did you know that there's 21 states that have already now passed a law that says you have to have voter ID? Are you aware of this? 21 states. More good news. The Federal Reserve, that corrupt institution of just printing money into an oblivion. Do you know that Florida is one of 20 states that has got Citizens for Sound Money? Ron DeSantis, whatever you think of him, is behind the sound money movement here in Florida. RC and Juliana Ormond, Pat Tip, I know that they've got a friend here, but they are working diligently behind the scenes to make sure that the Sound Money Act passes in Florida, which means we will have our own gold-backed currency. Our own gold-backed currency. There's 20 states going for this. That means we can fly the middle finger at the Federal Reserve and just get the hell out. We have got to defund the cabal, which means stop shopping in all the globalist-owned businesses. When I'm in a supermarket, if I don't know, I'll be up done in just a minute. If I don't know what I'm buying, I quickly do a research. I look at the name of the company and I find out who owns them, and I find out who owns them until I get to finding out if it's BlackRock or Vanguard, and I throw it back on the shelf. I don't want it. We've got to start supporting locally. We also have here in Florida Senate Bill 1752, brought forward by State Senator Blaise Ignalia, who is going for outlawing of machines and hand counting of votes. That was brought to my attention by Michael Thompson, whoever Michael Thompson was. So we have some good things going on. And another thing that I want to point out is, you know, the simplicity of some of the most obvious ways to solve problems are things that are already on the books. The Arizona situation. That could have been an easy flip to decertify that election, right? There's been so much evidence. Why isn't the Republican legislature doing anything about it? Did you know, they spent millions of dollars on an audit. It went nowhere, right? They weaponized it back against us. We've done canvassing, we've looked at, got cast vote record, and all this stuff, all these technical jargon. I mean, I have great friends, Jovan Pulitzer, one of them, that they've done so much brilliant work, it blows my mind how they're so smart. Did you know the most obvious thing was right there on their own Arizona revised statutes on the books that the current Republican legislature actually helped pass? And it was about how you count ballots. I mean, technically how you're supposed to treat the ballots, the ballot machines, all this stuff. Had they read that statute that they passed themselves, that election would have been null and void in 2020 and 2022. But they didn't even use their own law in the books. That tells you that they don't care about whatever is on their statutory, fake, administrative world versus the Constitution. They will do anything to keep us enslaved. And what's worse is what I call con ink, conservative ink. Yes. It is the very same people that will weaponize problems, profit off problems, talk about problems, but never talk to you about tactical solutions, how you can join the chapter. Go to tacticalcivics.com, and for $5 you can join, and you can be a part of the movement that will stand up a grand jury in your county and take the information that's already done. The investigations on COVID and election fraud have already been done. You don't need to go and do it again. Take that information and let's start indicting these criminals. Let's take our country back, because if we live past this false flag of Ukraine and the false flag of what's going on in Israel, not that people aren't dying, they are. But it's our own government creating the problem in concert with all the other governments that have a lot to gain. So I appreciate your time. Thank you for coming out today. God bless you. God bless America. And you rock.
I'm excited to announce that we're bringing back our best offer ever on our original My Slippers. You save $90 a pair with your promo code. And now My Slippers come in even more sizes. Smaller sizes, larger sizes, wide sizes, and all new styles and colors. Get them for your friends, your family, your neighbors, everyone you know. What makes My Slippers different is my exclusive 4-layer design that you're not going to find in any other slippers. My Slippers' patented layers make them ultra comfortable, extremely durable, and they help relieve stress on your feet. I'm so confident that you and everyone you know are going to love my slippers that I'm extending my 60-day money-back guarantee until March 1st, 2024, making them the best Christmas gifts ever. So go to mypillow.com or call the number on your screen now. Use your promo code to save $90. That's only $49.98 a pair. Quantities won't last long, so please order now.
Many of you have been asking, where am I getting the energy from? Where is the glow coming from? What's changed with your hair and skin? Well, simply in the last month, I started taking a product, C60 Evo. If you go to c60evo.com/Ann Vandersteel, you too can get radiant energy, mental focus with C60 Evo's ESS 60. What is it? That is pure C60. Get that increased flexibility, immunity, and longevity. And guess what, folks? It's not only for people too. You can get some for your pets. My animals are on it now. And that's right, I'm having trouble keeping up with Vegas, my dog, who I like to go on long walks with in the morning. He is battling back on the heat down here with his C60 Evo as well. Go to c60evo.com/Ann Vandersteel and try their delicious oils that you can eat and add into salads or put on your food, and also incredible facial serums and creams that are making a massive difference in the texture and feel of my skin. c60evo.com/Ann Vandersteel. Dr. Heidi Klessig, a retired anesthesiologist and observer to the Uniform Law Commission, is joining us now to determine how death is determined in the United States. Dr. Klessig, it's a welcome. It's a welcoming breath of fresh air to have someone who's reasonable talk about death on this show after everything we have witnessed over the past 4 years of this COVID pandemic. So thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you so much for having me on the program. This is a news story that has really been flying under the radar because most people aren't aware that the American Academy of Neurology petitioned the Uniform Law Commission to loosen brain death standards over the last year or two. And what I mean by loosen is basically make it easier to declare someone brain dead. Now, thankfully, after their annual meeting, the Uniform Law Commission was unable to come to consensus on this, and they tabled their work on revising the brain death laws for now, at least. So that is a real relief, because I can tell you many medical groups petitioned the Uniform Law Commission against this. Many disability groups don't want it to be easier to be declared dead based on loss of function. So this was very highly opposed. Unfortunately, because they weren't able to get brain death laws changed through the Uniform Law Commission, the American Academy of Neurology just recently, last October, came out with new guidelines for physicians, basically with the same language that they had given the Uniform Law Commission and were unsuccessful getting passed into law. So we are currently in a very odd position where the guidelines given to physicians for determining brain death do not adhere to the law in most states of the nation. So I'm really wanting people to be aware of this right now, because it is in the news, but it may not be something you've heard about.
You know, Dr. Klessig, this harkens back to what we've just witnessed in the horrors of COVID. It's as if, Nuremberg codes were, thrown right out the window, and medical experimentation forcing an experimental gene therapy on the public was just okay to do. And you saw all of the agencies get in lockstep with the CDC on the guidelines of COVID and force mandate, force lockdown, force mask, and force vaccinate millions of people here in this country and 5.5 billion around the world, shockingly so. And now we know that they knew. When I say they, I mean the governments, plural, worldwide, in a RICO criminal syndicate, knew that Pfizer had documentation that showed how deadly this quotes COVID shot was. So this to me right now is just another reflection of the schism and the breakdown in this entire medical apparatus when it comes to determining whether or not somebody is technically brain dead. And what I'm hearing you say is it sounds like it's becoming really the physician's choice whether or not they want to let you live or die based on if they decide you're dead or not.
Well, and what I want people to have is fully informed consent so they can make a good medical decision for themselves, for their family members, right? To explain what I'm talking about with brain death, I'd like to talk a little bit about actress Anne Hesh. If you want to show my second slide, if you have that there. Many of your viewers will remember Anne Hesh, unfortunately, her Mini Cooper ran off the road and collided with a house on August 5th of 2022. And a lot of us saw that footage at the scene where Anne was, responding to her paramedics at the time. But by August 11th, her spokesperson said she was not expected to survive, and indeed doctors declared her brain dead that same night. But Anne was a registered organ donor. So because she had registered as an organ donor, she was kept on life support until her actual death by organ harvesting on August 14th. And if you go to the third slide, this brought up an interesting kerfuffle, I guess, in the news. The Los Angeles Times reported her death with the morning paper, August 12th, because brain death equals legal death in California. But the Washington Post and the New York Times held their obituaries until her actual death by organ harvesting, August 14th. And when asked about this, I mean, it's kind of fun to agree with the Washington Post once in a while. Adam Bernstein, their obituary columnist editor, said, "It's black and white. There's no gray area here. If you're on life support, you're still alive. Other publications can make their own judgment about when they're comfortable publishing. I'm comfortable publishing when someone is actually dead," right?
Right.
So
why else do you call it life support? I mean, isn't that, it's still called life, not death support, it's life support.
That's
or
right.
Right? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Right. No, you're right. Anne was on life support. She had biological life. And so that brings up the question on slide 4. When is someone dead? And I'm contending that we need to stay with a biological definition of death, the same definition of death that people have used for thousands of years. Biologically, we die when all the amazing systems of our body stop working in harmony. In a biology book, they call that the loss of the integrative function of the organism as a whole. And most faith traditions define death as equivalent with biological death. And they interpret that as the departure of that spiritual element of our being is what causes that loss of bodily integration. The reason I advocate for a biological definition of death is that if we move away from that, now we're looking at a philosophical definition. What makes us human enough, right? What makes us qualify for life on this planet as a human being? Do we have to be mentally intact? Do we have to be physically intact? It's a slippery slope to declaring people in a vegetative state, people with dementia. I mean, when do you become not human anymore? It's a way of removing civil rights from vulnerable people. And so I am contending, and a lot of doctors are on board with this more and more as I speak around the country, that we need to go back to a biological definition of death. So if you want to go ahead to the 7th slide, where did this idea of brain death come from? I mean, it started actually in the 50s and 60s. You know, people were starting to be kept alive on ventilators and ICUs. And there was a practical concern. Are we going to have just stacks of these people that we can't help, and our hospitals will be overrun? At the same time, organ transplantation surgeries were picking up speed. And so after the first successful heart transplant in January of 1968, there were a couple before that, but they weren't terribly successful as far as long-term outcome. Doctors did change the brain death law. This is a picture of Clive Haupt. He was a black man in South Africa. He had a brain bleed and was brought to the hospital. And that same night that he was admitted to the hospital, the transplant team under Dr. Christian Barnard came to his doctor and wanted this man with his beating heart declared dead. Well, his doctor was a little nervous about that, but under considerable pressure, he did declare Mr. Haupt dead, transferred his care to the transplant team, who removed his beating heart that next day and put it in a retired white dentist. Now, doctors knew that this transplant was on shaky ground, both morally and legally. So if you go to slide 8, the definition of death was changed because doctors saw with Mr. Haupt's heart donation, we had to have fresh, viable organs for successful transplants. So what they decided is that they would simply redefine certain people who were in a coma as being dead. There were no tests, there were no studies, there was no scientific grounds for this. They simply took a category of people who had always been believed to be alive by everyone on Earth. Now, by fiat, by definition, we're going to call them dead so that we can take their fresh, viable organs.
Yeah. This is like when they changed the definition of vaccine so that they could allow gene therapy, which is not vaccination at all. It's rearranging your God-given DNA, but I digress.
It's a very good analogy. So if you go to slide 14, the Uniform Determination of Death Act then that you mentioned earlier was passed into law in 1981. And what this did is it made, in the United States, two ways of being declared dead. One would be the traditional, your heart and lungs stop, you become cold, stiff, and gray. The second was that if you had had irreversible cessation of all functions of the entire brain, including the brainstem, you could be declared dead. And eventually this was picked up by every state in the union and codified into law in some form with some variations. Notably, New Jersey is the only state in the union that has a religious exemption. So if you have a religious exemption to being declared dead by neurologic criteria, in New Jersey, you must only be declared dead by the traditional heart and lung standard. And you know, my on my wish list is, you know, why just one state? Why does it have to be a religious exemption? Why, as a society, can't we let anyone have an exemption to being declared brain dead if that's what they would prefer? So that's something that I would like to see going forward. And it was brought up by the Uniform Law Commission, interestingly enough, before they tabled their work on this.
Wow.
So what then happened over time is that it was found that people who were declared brain dead, if for some reason they didn't become organ donors or if they didn't have their care withdrawn, a lot of them remained alive. And Dr. Alan Schumann, a pediatric neurologist, in 1998 published a paper that showed 175 people who had been declared brain dead who continued to live, one ultimately more than 20 years. So it became very obvious that brain death was absolutely not the same as biological death.
And is if I might interrupt you briefly, Dr. Klessig, with respect to people who have the organ harvesting or organ donor on their driver's license, do you typically see that hospitals tend to rush judgment for the organ donor people versus those that don't want to give their organs? Should they be considered, on life support or brain dead?
I can't give a blanket answer to that. I think that there are doctors who are very conscientious and careful about that. What I saw in my own training was that it does affect doctors' judgment. In my book that I wrote, just came out last year, The Brain Death Fallacy, I talk about an episode during my training. I was sitting up in the pediatric ICU looking at a chart, preparing a different patient for surgery, when the transplant team came up to see their patient. And then when they were done visiting their patient, they started shopping. They started moving around the pediatric ICU looking at the other sick children to see, is anyone maybe not doing all that well?
Oh my gosh.
I have to tell you, it is a factor in people's care. Now, how much of a factor would be on an individual basis?
Well, we're learning just how bad, Epstein is with respect to organ harvesting and what they were doing, and it's not all fully come out, but it's been in the conspiracy ethos for a long time, and now those conspiracy theories are proving to be facts, sadly enough. The organ harvesting and transplant business is massive, and we know what they did with the Uyghurs in China. That's been massively reported on. So it's just it's really quite horrific. But continue on. I'm sorry.
Sure. If you want to go to slide 27, I'll just speak about Jahai McMath. Was a famous case that many people might remember. Jahai, this is a 13-year-old little girl who had a tonsillectomy and a palate repair for sleep apnea and had postoperative bleeding and underwent cardiac arrest. And she was declared, according to all the medical guidelines, she was declared correctly according to the guidelines to be brain dead. She had 4 flatlined EEGs. She had a radioisotope scan showing no intracranial blood flow. She was disconnected from her ventilator 3 times to see if she would breathe, and she didn't. But her parents looked at her. Here was their little girl. She was warm. She was moving at times. I mean, they could see her on the monitor. Her heart was beating. She wasn't, didn't appear to be dead. So they disputed this diagnosis, and they were given some help, and they moved Jahai to New Jersey, which, as I mentioned, is the only state in the union with a religious legal exemption to being declared brain dead. And on slide 28, you'll see that 3 months after Jahai was moved to New Jersey, she went through puberty and got her period. Now, how many corpses start to menstruate, honestly? This little girl was in no way dead biologically. In fact, she began to respond to commands, and they have video of her responding. I mean, her mother would say to her, Jahai, which is the FU finger, and she would respond appropriately. I mean, this girl was not dead. So they did an MRI of her brain 9.5 months later, and it showed that her upper structures of her brain were actually fairly well preserved. Her brain stem, which would control her breathing, was fairly destroyed, but she had a lot of preservation. And in fact, 2 neurologists who examined her later testified that she was no longer brain dead, but rather in a minimally conscious state. So here's an example of a girl who was correctly, according to the guidelines and under the new guidelines, would also have been diagnosed as brain dead, who was in no way dead and actually could have made more of a recovery if she had been given better care.
And to that point, and frankly, it's her family's decision at this point. I mean, nobody wants to lose a child. I mean, that's just
right.
not why we have children. We don't have children to harvest their organs and lose them, although there is probably a group of people out there, according to the people that like to hang out with Jeffrey Epstein, that would probably counter that narrative. But that's a separate, completely sick and off topic, group of people. This is clearly just another example of the medical industry that is really not in it to save patients, if I was to be so bold as to say so. Because again, I'm coming off the heels of COVID, where we saw the most horrific things. Hospitals were turned into, killing fields, for lack of a better expression. It was just horrific what went down.
Yeah. And again, I don't want to slam all doctors. I don't want to say that all people involved in transplant are somehow, money hungry or are trying to do wrong. I don't believe that's the case. I think that most doctors are wanting to do a good job, but this is something they have been taught in their training. And, we learn so much during medical school. There's no way you can investigate everything for yourself. So you do take a lot on faith from your authorities. And I myself am just as guilty of this as anyone else. When I was in my training, they sent me up to get an organ donor and give him an anesthetic for his organ donation. And gosh, I saw this young man. He was warm, he was pink, he had excellent vital signs. He was a lot more stable, in fact, than a lot of other ICU patients I had cared for. But because my authorities told me he was somehow dead, I took a man that deserved my protection and held him down using anesthetic techniques with drugs and paralyzing agents, and surgeons removed his organs, basically dissecting him to death before my eyes. And I should have known better. And, it's something I think that I will carry with me the rest of my life. And it's part of what motivates me to talk to people about this, that we have to not so blindly trust our authorities, but we have to look at the facts for themselves. And when later in life I did this research and found there was really no science behind this, I was absolutely appalled. And I want people to know the truth about this so they can make good decisions.
Yeah.
If you go to our website, respectforhumanlife.com, we have a survivors page. People might be surprised how many people have survived a brain death diagnosis. And a lot of them have actually returned to living a very normal life. And so, how is this possible? If you look at slide 29, there's a medical diagnosis called global ischemic penumbra. And there's a lot of numbers on the slide because I showed this to doctors at the annual meeting of the Association of American Physicians and Surgeons. But if I can explain this very simply, if your cerebral blood flow drops by half, your brain gets quiet. The electricity shuts down, you're not going to respond. But that doesn't mean your brain is destroyed. Tissue destruction doesn't happen until you've lost about 80% of your blood flow. It's a lot like when the lights go out in your house during a power outage. The wiring isn't destroyed. I mean, get that current flowing again and everything will come on again. And so the problem is this global ischemic penumbra, or GIP, is a perfect mimic for a brain death diagnosis. So there are a lot of people who could potentially be revived and could do well, but we're missing it because we're not checking for this.
Yeah. I have to say, Dr. Klessig, you're incredibly brave for what you just recanted from your own personal experience. And I just want to personally thank you for saying it in just how you did, that we shouldn't discard the entire medical profession, but in fact, it is the Rockefeller Medicine and institutes that have funded all the medical schools that are really to blame, because people just do. They follow the authority blindly, just like we always listen to our doctors blindly. Now we're learning we have to advocate for ourselves. We have a personal responsibility to God, who gave us this beautiful body, that we need to advocate for ourselves and protect the right to life that he bestowed upon us. And we shouldn't just blindly follow authorities. We have to trust but verify. So thank you so much for putting it that way. I'll let you continue on as we finish up here.
Sure, and I absolutely agree. And we do need to have our establishments of trust, but we also have to verify. So I think that's very well said. Thank you. I did just want to talk about the new neurology guidelines. That's on slide 31. This came out in October. Interestingly, if you see on the title, this is a consensus guideline. And that's because right on the front page, they admit that there is a lack of high quality evidence for this. If you go to slide 34, under their methods, I have underlined on the top in red that this panel of self-appointed experts, because of a lack of evidence on the subject, had to use an evidence-informed consensus process. Now, we've been declaring people brain dead for over 50 years. Wouldn't you think there would be some high-quality evidence for it by now? But instead, since there wasn't any, this group of self-appointed experts did majority voting. Now, what happened to the scientific method? This is not at all scientific.
Yeah.
The one thing also that I'm going to point out on this is they've changed their criteria. If you look at slide 37, from the legal standard, which is irreversible, now the medical criteria say permanent. And the way the committee of experts define this is that permanent means that the function is not going to resume spontaneously, and medical intervention will not be used to attempt the restoration of function. What that means is doctors are not going to try to help you. So whether you're dead or not now depends on your doctor's intentions, right, not your actual condition. And this is a problem.
It is. Dr. Klessig, this is a very informative interview with you, and I know you have plenty. You've got probably about another 20 slides you could go through. Unfortunately, we are out of time. I would really like to have you back on again and continue to present this information, because people need to stand on their rights, especially those bestowed by God. And it's okay to challenge the authorities in the white coats and the medical community, because again, they may not really be thinking through what you just presented, because in fact, they're just regurgitating what guidelines are because they're trusting the authority, not too dissimilar to how we trust them as the authority. And I think that's a very fair assessment and place to stand. So I thank you so much for your time this evening.
Thank you so much, Ann.
All right. Okay, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in again. We will see you back again tomorrow. We have another great show coming on, so you're not going to want to miss it. We have Tim McAdams joining us. He's a pilot who's got quite a story and he's going to be laying it all out, especially as things continue to evolve with COVID. Have a great evening, everybody.